Maplewood is an elegant and quiet residential neighborhood, where rows of maple trees blaze red in the fall, and the cobblestone streets remain impeccably clean. Everything here is orderly, from the neatly trimmed lawns and houses painted in the same neutral tones to the street signs that are regularly polished. At the center of this neighborhood is Karen Whitmore, a 58-year-old widow who has been the president of the HOA, Homeowners Association, for over 10 years. She lives alone in a large Victorian-style house with a spacious porch, tall windows, and a meticulously maintained backyard garden. No one in the neighborhood is truly close to her, but everyone knows she is the one who keeps order here. Karen was once a dedicated and principled high school teacher, but after her husband, Richard, passed away from a sudden heart attack 15 years ago, she lost her passion for teaching. She devoted all her time to the HOA, monitoring every house, every lawn, and every improperly parked car. To her, order was the most important thing. She believed that without rules, the neighborhood would fall into chaos. Residents of the neighborhood have mixed opinions about Karen. Some respect her because she keeps Maplewood clean and safe, but others see her as a dictator. Rigid, cold, and always waving warning letters with a stern expression. Under Karen's management, the HOA enforces strict rules that no one is allowed to break. Lawns must be cut to exactly 2 inches, no more, no less. No overnight street parking. All vehicles must be kept in garages. Fences, roofs, and windows must always be clean, with no stains or peeling paint. Any exterior modifications must be approved by the HOA, from wall colors to the types of plants in gardens. To Karen, these rules are not just regulations. They are her way of maintaining control over life, keeping everything neat and structured, leaving no room for disorder, loss, or pain. But Karen doesn't realize that her need for control is turning her into a lonely person. On an early summer morning, Maplewood welcomed a new resident, Mark Dawson, 42 years old. He moved into the neighborhood on a sweltering afternoon, with a moving truck parked in front of house number 27, a small but cozy home with a brown-tiled roof and a spacious front porch. No one in the neighborhood paid much attention to Mark on his first day, except for Karen, who was always watching everything. Mark was a former soldier. He had served in the military for over a decade, traveling to distant lands, facing loss and death. But nothing could have prepared him for the greatest heartbreak of his life: losing his beloved wife, Emily. Emily was a doctor, a gentle, life-loving woman whose smile could wipe away any exhaustion. But then, a cruel cancer took her from him after 2 relentless years of battling the disease. Mark had watched her grow weaker by the day, endured countless nights where she lay in pain, unable to sleep, and forced himself to stay strong whenever she said, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm just afraid of leaving you." She was gone, and Mark's world crumbled. After taking care of everything, he decided to leave his old city and find a peaceful place to start over. Maplewood seemed like the perfect choice, an orderly, safe neighborhood without too much chaos. But after moving in, he realized the house felt unbearably empty. Mark spent days just staring at his front yard, a barren, lifeless patch of grass. He missed Emily. She had once told him that if they ever had a new home, she would plant wild daisies by the porch. She loved wild daisies, small yet resilient flowers that could thrive even in the harshest places. One afternoon, Mark decided to plant a bed of wild daisies in his front yard. He went to a nursery, carefully choosing small but vibrant daisy plants. He dug the soil himself, gently placed each plant in the ground, covered them with fresh earth, and watered them. When the first flowers started to bloom, for the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. But Mark had no idea that this simple act would ignite an unavoidable conflict with Karen Whitmore. The next morning, as usual, Karen left her house at 6:30 a.m. for her daily walk around the neighborhood, inspecting every street corner and front yard. She always carried a small notebook, jotting down violations to send warning letters to the residents. When she reached house number 27, she stopped in her tracks. Right in the front yard was a bed of wild daisies, their bright yellow petals stretching toward the morning sun. Karen frowned. This wasn't right. According to HOA regulations, residents were not allowed to plant flowers or vegetation outside of the approved list. And wild daisies, those untamed roadside flowers, were certainly not on that list. She took a deep breath and moved on, but an uneasy feeling lingered in her chest. That afternoon, Karen sat in her office, a HOA violation notice form in front of her. She had written hundreds of these letters over the past 10 years, but this time, as she picked up her pen, she hesitated. That flower bed wasn't ugly. It wasn't an overgrown mess or a patch of unruly weeds. It was well kept, each plant neatly arranged in perfect rows. But rules were rules. If she allowed this exception, what would come next? Would Maplewood still be the orderly neighborhood she had worked so hard to maintain? After a few moments of thought, Karen let out a sigh, picked up her pen and signed her name. Her decision was made. And soon, the violation notice would reach Mark Dawson. Mark found the letter when he returned home in the late afternoon. It was neatly clipped to his front door, bearing the familiar red seal of the HOA. He opened it and read, HOA violation notice. Recipient * Mark Dawson, homeowner of house number 27. Violation * planting unauthorized vegetation not included in the HOA approved list. Deadline for correction * 7 days. Requirement * remove the wild daisy flower bed from the front yard. Failure to comply within the given time frame will result in enforcement actions and financial penalties. HOA President, Karen Whitmore. Mark clenched the paper in his hand, frustration rising in his chest. He had heard about the HOA's strictness, but he never imagined they could dictate something as simple as planting a small flower bed. He looked out at the yard. The wild daisies still stood there, reaching toward the evening sun, delicate yet resilient. Emily had loved these flowers. He had planted them for her, to keep a piece of her close. And now some meaningless rule was demanding that he tear them out? No, Mark had no intention of following this order. The next morning, Mark didn't go straight to work. He headed directly to the HOA office instead. The office was in a small building near the center of the neighborhood. A tidy, spotless place with neatly arranged shelves of documents and the faint scent of floor cleaner in the air. Karen was at her desk when Mark knocked on the door. She looked up, slightly surprised to see the tall, solidly built man standing before her. He looked strong, yet there was a deep sorrow hidden in his eyes, something she noticed immediately, though she said nothing. "Mr. Dawson?" she said, her voice calm. "That's right. I want to talk about my flower bed." Karen wasn't surprised. She gestured for him to sit. The HOA rules are clear. Front yard landscaping must comply with the approved plant list. Wild daisies are not on that list. Mark crossed his arms, staring at her. "They're just a few flowers. They're not hurting anyone. But if I allow you to keep them, others will want to do the same. Without rules, this neighborhood would quickly fall into chaos." Mark let out a dry chuckle. Chaos? Over a small flower bed? Karen didn't answer right away. She met his gaze, and for a moment, she saw a determination that wouldn't be easily swayed. "Rules are rules, Mr. Dawson," she said slowly. "I'm not removing them," Mark replied firmly. Karen tilted her head slightly, studying him. In all her years as HOA president, most residents had followed the rules without question. But Mark wasn't like them. This was not a man who backed down easily. She tapped her fingers lightly on the desk. "If you don't comply, the HOA has the right to enforce the removal. I'd rather not escalate this." "Neither would I. But I'm not tearing out that flower bed." They stared at each other in silence. This battle, though not yet fully begun, was now inevitable. News of the dispute between Mark and Karen quickly spread throughout the neighborhood. Some residents supported Karen, believing that rules needed to be upheld to keep Maplewood orderly. They didn't want their neighborhood turning into a chaotic mess where everyone did as they pleased. But others sided with Mark, especially the younger residents, who had long felt that the HOA was too strict and outdated. To them, there was no real reason why a man shouldn't be allowed to plant a few flowers in his own front yard. The story of the small flower bed suddenly became the talk of afternoon tea gatherings and the neighborhood's social media groups, and no one could deny that it had created a deep divide between two opposing sides in Maplewood. Mark continued to water his flowers every day. He didn't back down. And Karen? She had never lost a battle over HOA rules. And she had no intention of starting now. After a week, when Mark showed no signs of backing down, Karen sent him a formal fine notice, requiring him to pay $100 per day until the flower bed was removed. Mark received the letter in the morning. He simply smirked, folded it, and tossed it onto the table. One day, $100. 1 week, $700. 1 month, over $3,000. Mark knew Karen was forcing him to make a choice. Either lose money or tear down the flower bed. But he wasn't the type to be pressured. That evening, Mark opened his laptop, logged into the neighborhood's social media group, and wrote a post. Does a flower bed really ruin the neighborhood? I'm Mark Dawson, resident of house number 27. I planted a small flower bed in my front yard, but the HOA has ordered me to remove it. I don't understand why a few flowers have become such a big issue. I believe people deserve the right to control their own living spaces as long as it harms no one. What do you all think? Mark's post immediately gained massive attention. Dozens of comments flooded in. I completely agree. The HOA is too authoritarian. We need change. It's time to question these ridiculous rules. I don't like how Karen controls everything to her liking. But there were also opposing views. Rules are rules. If you don't like them, don't move here. If the HOA doesn't enforce strict guidelines, this place will turn into chaos. The debate exploded, fiercer than ever. And that's when Karen realized this battle had spiraled beyond her control. It was no longer just between her and Mark. It had become a war for the entire neighborhood. Karen sat at her desk, her eyes scanning through the hundreds of comments on Mark's post. Some supported him, others opposed him, but what concerned her most was that the debate had spiraled out of control. The HOA had always held absolute authority in Maplewood. But if too many residents started questioning the rules, that would become a serious problem. She had to shut this down immediately. That evening, Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting. In the small meeting room, 4 members of the HOA board sat around the table. Karen began, Mark Dawson is challenging our authority. If we let this continue, the HOA will lose credibility. I propose a stronger action. Bob, a longtime member, nodded. Enforcement. Karen nodded back. Exactly. If he refuses to remove the flower bed, we'll do it for him. Another member, Linda, hesitated. We've never had to do this to a resident before. Karen met her gaze, her voice firm. If we don't set an example, we'll lose control. Tomorrow night, I'll send the maintenance team to Mark's house to remove the flower bed. No one objected. The attack was set in motion. Mark was sitting in his living room when he heard an unusual noise coming from the front yard. He stepped outside and saw 2 men in HOA uniforms, shovels and gloves in hand, preparing to uproot the flower bed. Mark froze in shock. What the hell are you doing? He shouted. One of the men, seemingly the leader, responded firmly. We have orders from the HOA. You violated the regulations, so we're removing this flower bed. Mark lunged forward, blocking their way. This is my property. You have no right. We do have the right, the man interrupted, holding up an official HOA notice. If you interfere, we'll call the police. Mark clenched his fists, rage boiling inside him. But he knew that if he resorted to force, he'd only put himself in a worse position. He took a deep breath, locked eyes with the 2 men and said, I won't let this go. Then he turned and walked back inside. The wild daisies were ripped out that night, leaving behind a patch of bare, empty soil. But inside Mark, the fire of his anger had ignited into an unstoppable blaze. The next morning, Mark didn't go to work. He went straight to his lawyer's office. His attorney, James Carter, flipped through the HOA documents Mark had brought. You want to sue them? James asked. No, Mark shook his head. I want to take down the HOA. James raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Are you seriously considering this? I've done my research. The HOA only exists because of the residents' support. If enough people oppose them, we can call for a vote to replace the board. And I'm sure plenty of people in this neighborhood are sick of their control. James leaned back in his chair, smirking. This sounds interesting. I need you to help me draft a petition. I'll collect signatures from the residents. James nodded. All right, but you'll need at least 60% of Maplewood's residents to sign in order to force a vote. Do you think you can pull that off? Mark clenched his fists. I will. A few days later, Mark launched his campaign. He knocked on every door, spoke with residents, and explained the injustice of the HOA. If they can tear down my flower bed today, tomorrow they can force you to repaint your house, change your fence, or even ban you from having pets. We can't let them control our lives. Many people listened and agreed. Some older residents still supported the HOA, but many young families signed the petition. They were tired of the unreasonable rules and wanted change. Within a week, Mark's petition gathered over 40% of the signatures needed. Karen heard about it, and she couldn't just sit back and do nothing. One morning, when Mark woke up and stepped outside, he saw a new letter from the HOA taped to his door. He opened it and skimmed through. Notice of household suspension. Recipient * Mark Dawson. Reason * disruptive behavior in the neighborhood. Inciting residents against the HOA. Penalty * suspension of HOA meeting participation rights. Ineligibility to vote or run for any leadership position in the HOA. HOA President, Karen Whitmore. Mark let out a cold laugh. Karen was trying to take him out of the game, but she had made a huge mistake. He raised his phone, took a picture of the letter, and posted it on the neighborhood's social media group. The HOA just banned me from meetings simply because I dared to challenge them. Is this really the kind of organization you want controlling our lives? The post received hundreds of comments, more than any before. Some people still sided with the HOA, but the wave of opposition had never been stronger. Mark knew that with just one more push he could win. But he also knew that Karen had never lost a battle easily. The real fight had only just begun. Karen couldn't believe how fast Mark's post was spreading. She stared at her computer screen as hundreds of comments poured in. *. I've always hated the HOA. We need to stand up to them. *. Who do Karen and her people think they are? I already signed the petition. *. Maplewood needs a change. *. Karen gritted her teeth. Mark Dawson was shaking the foundation of her power. We can't let him win. She called an emergency meeting with the HOA board members. If Mark gathers enough signatures, we'll lose control. We need to stop this immediately. Bob, her most loyal supporter, spoke up. Can't we just reject his petition? Karen shook her head. It's not that simple. But I have another plan. A dirty plan. The next day, while Mark was talking to another resident, a police car suddenly pulled up in front of his house. 2 officers stepped out. Mark Dawson. Mark frowned. Yes, what's going on? One of the officers handed him a document. You've been reported for violating Maplewood's building codes. We have an order to inspect your property. Mark froze. Building code violation? We received a complaint that your porch doesn't meet safety standards. If the inspection confirms this, you'll be fined and may have to make mandatory repairs. Mark immediately knew this was Karen's doing. This is retaliation. The officer shrugged. We're just following procedure, sir. Mark clenched his jaw, but he knew losing his temper wouldn't help. There was only one thing he could do: fight to the end. That evening, Mark held a neighborhood meeting at the park. Over 50 people showed up, furious at the HOA's actions. Mark stood before the crowd, raising the petition high. The HOA is using dirty tactics to silence us. They sent the police to my house, trying to intimidate me. But we won't back down. The crowd clapped and cheered. An elderly resident, Mr. Mike, shouted, I've lived here for 20 years, and I've never seen the HOA act this corrupt. I'm signing. Another person added, If they can do this to Mark, who knows who'll be next? Support for Mark reached its peak. That night alone, he collected the remaining signatures needed to reach 60%. The official vote would take place. Karen knew she was about to lose everything, and she wasn't going down without a fight. 1 week later, Maplewood residents gathered at the community hall to vote. Karen stood at the podium, trying to salvage the situation. I've led this neighborhood for over 15 years. We have rules for the safety and order of our community. If Mark wins, the HOA will lose its ability to enforce discipline. Some people nodded, but most had already changed their minds. Mark stepped forward, looking Karen straight in the eye. You talk about discipline, but in reality you just want control. The HOA has become your tool to rule over us. But today that ends. Applause erupted. The vote began. Karen held her breath. 15 minutes later, the results were announced. Mark won. The HOA was overthrown. ***. Karen stood in stunned silence. A few days later, Karen received a letter from the neighborhood attorney's office. HOA President Karen Whitmore. Following the results of the March 22 vote, the current HOA board will be dissolved. The residents have decided to establish a new system without your leadership. We expect you to vacate the office by March 30th. Karen let the letter fall onto the desk, her eyes empty. She had lost. She had lost everything. Mark stepped onto his porch, taking a deep breath. No more HOA control, no more ridiculous rules. His flower bed would be replanted. But more importantly, the residents had reclaimed their freedom. He smiled. This victory wasn't just his. It belonged to all of Maplewood. #### lessons and meaning behind the story. 1. Power must be kept in check ****. This story highlights the corruption of power when left unchecked. Karen and the HOA were originally meant to maintain order, but they gradually became tools of oppression. This reflects the reality that any organization, no matter how well-intentioned at first, can become corrupt without oversight and resistance from the community. 2. The strength of a united community ***. Mark proved that when residents stand together, they can change any system. Despite Karen's authority and manipulative tactics, the community's support allowed Mark to overthrow her. This teaches us the power of unity and fighting for justice. 3. Never fear standing up to injustice ***. Mark faced threats and dirty tricks multiple times, yet he persisted. If he had given up, the HOA would have continued ruling over Maplewood. This reminds us that sometimes changing a broken system requires courage and the willingness to take risks. 4. No one's power is untouchable ***. Karen believed her control was unshakable, but in the end, the very people she ruled brought her down. This proves that nothing lasts forever, and those who abuse power will eventually face consequences. 5. A good system must be fair and transparent ***. The HOA failed because it served only a small group in power rather than the community as a whole. For a system to survive in the long run, it must be built on fairness, transparency, and the voices of the people.